All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Being True to Yourself, writing about identity with Florence Gonsalves and Ray Stoeve. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Please be aware that this session is being recorded. And if you could please remain muted at all times so that everybody can hear what's being said. Please feel free to put any questions that you have for the authors in the feed loop chat, but please be respectful and kind. And if you are having any problems with the connection, please try turning off your own video. And now I have the honor of introducing you to Florence Gonsalves and Ray Stoeve. Florence is the author of Dear Universe and Love and Other Carnivorous Plants, and is a college graduate from Dartmouth College. She says that in an author essay that she finds humor to be important and, quote, "It is the access point to otherwise unapproachable topics, and if we never approach such things, how can we expect to confront them at all?" Ray Stoeve just published their first young adult novel, Between Perfect and Real, a few weeks ago, so congratulations, Ray. They received a Made at Hugo House Fellowship for their young adult fiction and were selected to attend the inaugural Tin House YA workshop in 2019 and 2020. Ray also professes to have once eaten a rattlesnake. I'm impressed. And is the proud plant parent of 41 houseplants and succulents. They are both here today to discuss writing about identity. We invite you again to put any questions that you might have for the authors in the chat, and our volunteers will present them to the authors. Now, if you guys, Ray and Florence, would like to say a quick hello.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here.
Hi, same.
Wonderful. We're so glad to have you guys here. So to start us off, how do you create genuine characters that readers will see themselves in?
I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes people do what they do, and not just like momentary impulses, but like what is their childhood trauma or like their wounding, or what is their secret fear, and what do they, like my editor put it in a really good way, what is the thing that this character wants, and how do they act in a way that makes them not get it, and then how do they work to change their own mind so that they can get what they want. And that was, I had been trying to do that sort of with more and more finesse over the years, but that question really just like brought it home for me. And that was just with my second book, so we're always learning.
Yeah, I agree that once you know what the character wants more than anything, you understand, or I understand a lot more about their psychology and like what drives them, which then brings back their whole history, and then it kind of all starts to fall into place. Another thing that I like to do, which seems kind of silly, is that I make up a weird story behind my character's name, and then like I get it goes really far. So like Chamomile is named after her mother's goat, which only had, X milk production, and she nursed herself on her own teat, right? Like it gets weird and gross, but like then I'm like, okay, yeah, like now this person's real because I've given her something gross, and let's go.
That's a really funny story. I like that. Gender and gender identity are discussed a lot more openly these days than they used to be. Do you think that we are moving in a more positive direction for understanding, and why or why not?
It's hard to say. I think that people have a lot more access now to terminology, and just different narratives, and social media has given a lot of people opportunities to like share their personal experience. And so there's, usually someone out there that you can find to relate to, even if their whole experience doesn't speak to you. I don't know. I think that like in the trans community, it feels like we have this sort of discourse a lot. And with every sort of Trans Day of Visibility or Trans Week of Awareness, we have this conversation about like, okay, visibility has brought so much good. And it's also come with like an increase in hate crimes and an increase in people knowing about us. Doesn't necessarily mean that they know the right things or that they are okay with us, and so I think that we still have a long way to go, and we're seeing that now in the US where there's an uptick, in awareness means then all the people who are not on board get freaked out and want to pass a whole bunch of laws to restrict trans people's lives and bodily autonomy. So it's a double-edged sword.
That's really interesting. Yeah, as a cis person, I know the difference that I've seen like in my personal life and in my family just with conversations about pronouns. And I mean that, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I think it has been difficult to come up against people who have these really old viewpoints that are transphobic in a lot of cases, and trying to have conversations with them. And that hasn't seemed to get any better or easier, or like I haven't seen like a leap in improvement with conservative awful family members. But it is interesting that at least people are having more conversations. But like you said, awareness, I suppose, is a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And I find it interesting to think about gender too, like not just for trans folks, but in the books, in my second YA that I'm working on right now, the main character is a cis girl, but she does spend time thinking about, like, what kind of woman am I? What kind of girl do I want to be? Like, I don't identify with this, like, kind of girlhood, but what do I identify with? And that's true for, trans girls too, and cis boys and cis girls, and non-binary people who have to kind of like create their own idea of like what their gender is. So it's like everybody has a gender, and I think trans people have just been thinking about that for a lot longer. But I think now, everybody's thinking more about what it means to be their particular gender.
Absolutely. With the kind of theme of this panel being true to yourself, how have you experienced trying to put your experiences and yourselves into your work?
Florence, I'll let you take that one first.
As someone who's definitely been on a journey with respect to like sexuality and trying to figure out what I want to call myself or what I'm even interested in or attracted to outside of, it's been really hard for me to step outside of like the very straight, white, patriarchal culture that I grew up in. And so I think for me, writing Love and Other Carnivorous Plants, Danny is like not sure of her queerness and not comfortable with it. And I think that what was helpful for me was just having a place to write everything that I didn't feel I could say. So it got almost channeled into all the things that I was feeling like with confused sexuality, was able to go into this Word document and then kind of become, and then it just kind of built into a story, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of a tough one to think about and answer, I guess.
Can you repeat the question for those of us whose words just fly right out of their heads?
So with the title of this panel being true to yourself, how have you kind of put yourself into your work and really shown up for yourself, I guess?
Yeah.
Through writing.
Yeah. Great question. I think that like the biggest way that I put myself into this work is not necessarily what people think, because a lot of people assume that like the book is an autobiography, and the events of the book are not, like none of them happen to me. But you know, some things are drawn from my personal experience. But I think like the biggest way that I put myself into my work is just by committing to showing the like messiness and the nuance of Dean's experience and his uncertainty and fear and joy and, you know, worries and desires, however like tentative or unformed. And because that was my process too. Like I started questioning when I was 19. That was 2008. And I'm 31 now. And you know, just feel in the past year that I feel like I am fully myself and fully embodying gender the way that I want to. And just committing to like showing that on the page and not trying to make it palatable or make it fit into like an easy linear narrative.
I like what you said about not the linear narrative. I think I was like, eventually, once the novel was written, I was like retrospectively like, oh no, like what category does this fit into? Like, it's not a coming out story, but it's not really a straight story. Oh my God. And I don't know. I think that it was nice to have that experience after, because if I'd had that before I'd written it, I think that would have been really limiting and really detrimental. So yeah, I like what you said about kind of occupying non-linear space and letting the messiness come through for sure.
So what would you say is more important to you, the journey or the destination?
It seems like the journey for both of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the journey is the writing. And I think at the end of the day, I really am here for the writing, which I know sounds like I'm not trying to be facetious or anything. But I think a lot of times I'll joke about, oh, writing is so brutal. And sometimes it is. And sometimes it's really lonely and discouraging and full of rejections and doubts and insecurities and tears. And, you know, like there's, here we go. There's like definitely rejection is really my favorite. The number of times I've been rejected, like in this last year alone, like, oh man. However, as I was saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question?
What is more important to you, the journey or the destination?
Journey or the destination, right. Yeah, so I think writing is the journey, and I joke about not wanting to do it. But at the end of the day, like it's how I make sense of the world and make sense of my situations and myself. And so in that aspect, it's definitely about the journey, but then it's really cool to see a novel come together. And in that way, it's also very much about the destination. And when I was, my first book, Love and Other Carnivorous Plants, I wrote when I was, like I just graduated from college. And it felt, when I finished that, I was like, great. And then the editors were like, okay, what's book 2? And I was like, like, I just give you these are all the stories I have. Like, I don't have anything else to give you. Like, then, and for like 2 years, it was this brutal process of trying to come up with book ideas, trying to write manuscripts that like was presentable to my editor and like the team of people, and it just came out horribly. Like I almost got my contract canceled because I simply could not start with the destination pretty much of being like a book idea and then go back and try and journey up to it. Like I was physically incapable. So that being said, it was really interesting for Dear Universe to like finally come up with the destination and then to see how many failures, how many hundreds of pages, how many hundreds of hours like just didn't make it into the final book, but we're still like very much part of its becoming.
Yeah. I like what you're saying about the writing being the journey. And I think I have a similar experience like with on BPAR's publication day. I actually was really sad most of the day because that was the day where I sort of realized, oh, I like never get to write this book again. Like I never get to like, cause I'm not going to do a sequel. Sorry. I'm gonna like hang out with these characters. I'm never gonna like explore their particular world, their dynamics. And in the case of that book, I spent like, I had the initial idea and wrote a few scenes, back in 2009, and then had been writing it in earnest for 5 years, since like 2015. And there was so much of my life that had been in companionship with this book. And now similarly to you, like it was a little bit easier for me with my second book because I had written it before I even sold Between Perfect and Real. And so I had that under wraps. And so I did just get like edits for that. And that's kind of in the pipeline. But now I'm having a similar experience with my third book where I'm like, it's easy for me to proliferate ideas, but then I have to pick one. And then I'm like, oh, I have to write on deadline, a whole book for the first time in my life. Are you kidding? Like, it's very daunting. Yeah. So I love the journey. The destination has a lot of mixed feelings. I feel like I've learned a lot of patience from this job and the industry in general. Yeah.
I just like to put out there is nothing more disappointment than pub day. Because like you wait years for this day that the book is gonna like hit bookstores, and I was like, here we go, and then they always come out on Tuesdays. I guess it's just like book industry. So it's Tuesday, and I'm ready to have my mind blown, and it's just nothing. It's just another day that a book showed up at a bookstore, and I was like, oh, okay. And last year was the pandemic, so like I couldn't even go to a bookstore. I was just like, all right, here I don't know, I would love if there were, like, if the destination came with more fireworks, but I have not experienced that yet either.
Yeah.
One of our teams asked, what has been your experience sharing these kind of intimate stories with the writing community? Do you experience any, hate from expressing your identities, or is everyone pretty accepting?
I haven't experienced any hate. I feel like I've been really lucky. When I found my agent, it was through DV Pit, which is a Twitter pitch event specifically for marginalized voices. So I found a whole network of folks, found my agent through that. And it's been both like really amazing having people feel seen by my book and tell me that they feel seen, because I put so much of myself into it that then it feels like it's a feedback loop where I feel seen by them feeling seen. And at the same time, I don't want to be perceived at all. Like, I don't want to be seen by people. And it's very like, because it's so personal to me and I put so much of myself into it, it can feel very like, oh no, I've been exposed. Like, it's very intimate. It's both totally impersonal because it's out in the world and my day-to-day life hasn't changed much. And it's also very intimate because people who don't know me at all feel seen. It's a really wild thing.
Yeah, I had like an entire identity crisis before Love and Other Carnivorous Plants came out. The character is very much uncomfortable expressing her sexuality, like doesn't want to have to be like the spokesperson for gayness, doesn't want to join any clubs. Like she's very like negative, I guess you could say, but it's also like just her experience with queerness and where she happens to be at. And right before it came out, I just like entered this panic of who am I to write this story? Because I was still under the impression that I was straight, as if like this book hadn't emerged from like the deepest part of my subconscious, but whatever, that's a different panel, I suppose. And it was just like, it was a real, like, it felt horrible. Like this crisis of like, I felt like a fake, I guess you could say, even though the words were 100% true, it felt like, and I think it just had to do with, like you said, being seen. Was like, okay, in the next, week, suddenly people who don't have no idea who I am are going to know some of the most difficult things that I've experienced, and obviously fictionalized them, but they're still very much rooted in real life. And there was something so petrifying about that, and like very much imposter syndrome. Like, I shouldn't be telling this story. Who am I? Like, go back under my rock. But yeah. But I think actually since then, I've gotten slowly more comfortable with at least claiming more queerness. I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with that, but that's only really been in the last year. And I don't know, it was really helpful, I think, to have the book go there first, and then for it to like slowly reveal itself to me once it had already been like very laid out for the entire world. I mentioned this in another panel, but like my mom's book club read it, and it's just like, I was like, Mom, who would do that? Why would you subject? It was a nightmare. Like, all of the moms are, this is what teenage girls experience. I was like, not all of them. It's not all one story. But yeah, so that was definitely, I don't know, I relate to that kind of, it's impersonal, but also like incredibly personal, and being seen and feeling seen can be a lot.
Absolutely. You kind of started to touch on this a bit, Florence, but when you guys are writing about different identities, do you write about some that you've not experienced before? I'm sure you have. And how do you find ways to be sensitive to those identities? And has it impacted your writing in any way?
Yeah, plenty of my secondary characters have identities that I don't share. Ronnie is a queer Black boy. Jade is a Black trans girl. And I think the process of trying to write the secondary characters, I feel lucky that I had a lot of people who were really willing to give of their like time and energy to me and give me feedback before the book ever even made it to an agent. Because even, when I first initially came up with the idea, I was a baby. Like, I didn't know anything. I didn't, social justice language was not a part of daily teen life when I was growing up. Or like even, not even social justice language, but just like reality. Like, we just didn't talk about that. And so I really had to, I think it's helped that I've never really been precious about my work, but I had to go from being like, oh, I've created a complete stereotype of a character, to really digging into the layers of like whiteness that allowed me to do that, and having 10 years of life experience to like unpack a lot of stuff. And even then, like, still working with sensitivity readers. And I think that it makes me a better writer to not think that like I am ever good at it, like good at representing people who aren't like me. Because like even though I feel happy with where I left those characters and the other characters in my book who like have different identities than me. Someone could come along tomorrow and take issue with that, and like it's my job to take that in. And I feel like I feel like sometimes authors take it personally and get upset, but to me, it's like that's like free education. And why would you ever be upset at someone giving you like free education? Um, and yeah, I love writing because I want to understand people and I want people to feel seen by my work. And so to do that, I need to be like always checking myself and open to critique at all times.
I had a really hard time even, well, this sounds really self-absorbed, but like even just thinking about people who weren't like me initially for my stories. Like my first book is very white because I grew up in a very white town and I just didn't have the imagination to like think that maybe there are different scenarios. And that was a real limitation, I think, especially early on in my writing, was that I was just with my blinders in my world and was like, okay, this is where I operate. Like, thank you, that's it. And yeah, but I think I know that in writing some of my more openly queer characters, I did, I guess you could call it research, which sounds weird, but basically, you know, like reading queer authors and watching queer films and talking to queer friends. And my friend group was very open about reading some of my passages and being like, hey, have you considered that maybe this queer character would be really frustrated with this other queer character's like hiding her in public? And I was like, oh, thank you. Right. Like, so I guess my point being, I want to continue to like broaden my horizons when it comes to writing about identities that aren't my own, because, you know, it's so important that people see themselves reflected in stories. And I think that there's definitely a way to write not your identity in a way that is respectful and like does due diligence to a character, you know, that doesn't just fall into stereotypes or yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of moving slightly away from that, is there anything that you guys found really hard to write about with respect to identity, whether it's your identity or other identities, anything that you kind of struggled with during the writing process?
Not wanting my word to be taken as like God on any subject, you know, I think, and then like specifically thinking of where trans lit is at right now, or trans representation, because there's so many more books out there, you know, comparatively from zero. But at the same time, we're still just at the beginning. And so every book has this pressure to be like the perfect representative book for everybody, when in fact, like you can have two trans boys and they can have totally different experiences. You can have a non-binary person and a trans girl, totally different experiences. Two trans people can both have the same assigned gender and have totally different, you know, so I think like that's also why I made Dean not the only trans character, is because I don't want to just be like, I don't want to be held up as like, this is the trans experience. This is the coming out story. This is what it's like for everybody, because my gender even shifted in the course of writing this book. Like I was much more trans masc identified when I really started writing it in earnest. And even though I initially came out as non-binary, and now I'm just non-binary and I'm just me. I just do me. But yeah, so I don't, the pressure of being a representative was definitely the hardest part of writing, and like finding ways to honor the fact that like people are going to see this as a representative book, no matter what I say, no matter what I do. People will be using this as an educational tool, and that's fine. But if they're going to do that, then I need to make it something that like I can feel proud of them using it that way. So yeah.
I think especially with my first character, Danny, the one who's like grappling with her sexuality, I was most worried that her cynicism towards just like claiming her identity was going to discourage others from finding a bigger community or really like owning their desires, which I think was just rooted in this fear that this is going to be taken as the one way to read a character questioning sexuality. So I think, yeah, for me, the biggest concern was that she was going to be taken as not like a role model, but as this is how you could handle it. And like, you could handle it that way. I'm not saying I recommend it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess I was worried about it reading as this is how you should deal with XYZ situation, when there are so many ways to deal with so many situations. And this character really just reflects one fictional person's like life experiences. Yeah, so I guess I was most worried about like discouraging like queer people who like have really found a lot of like empowerment, say in like a big coming out celebration or in different groups, that it's just not Danny's thing, but that doesn't mean that it's not a really great connector for people. So yeah, which I think is also kind of getting back to what you were saying, Ray, about like almost the danger of one story, that like this is not, you cannot possibly represent an entire like group of people with one person's story, but there's always that fear in kind of marginalized groups that now this person represents everybody, and that's so much pressure, when really we see like gazillions of representations of like, for example, straight white people, and you know, it's never like they're that one, you know. Anyway.
Totally. I think that people like look at fictional characters sometimes and forget that they're like supposed to be just like one person, you know? And like I created this person from the depths of my own mind, and they're supposed to feel as much like a real single person individual like as possible, but people make them into these like standees for an experience, and yeah, it's tough.
So it seems like characters that you both have written have kind of struggled with their identities and possibly more alone, at least at first. So you guys don't have to answer this, but one of our teams was curious if you guys have had any support in coming to terms with your identities, maybe starting out, or if you kind of had to figure it out on your own.
I think it's varied for me. I think with both, I initially in high school came out as bi, and then at like, I think I was 25 when I came out as non-binary. And, you know, I've used different words along the way too. But for each of like, for queerness and for transness, initially it was a very mostly internal process. But I was really lucky in high school that there was like a GSA that I was part of. And when I did come out, like all my friends were really supportive, and my parents were too. And then in terms of being trans, by the time I did decide to come out and change my pronouns, it was because I started to know people who used they them pronouns and who were out, and like, once again, like I'm really lucky. Like I have a really supportive family and people who like didn't really like, my family is really good at like both immediate and extended. Like if they might not totally get it, but like they're gonna like go with it. And I have like a wonderful group of friends and I'm surrounded by queers and trans people now, so it's great. Therapy too, highly recommend.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't have a ton of support. Like I grew up in a very like it was a pretty conservative town, I would say, and my parents are liberals, but like they're that sneaky liberal where like they say that they're all inclusive and love everybody, but then my mom pulls me aside and she's like, you know, I felt a little uncomfortable with the girl on girl in your book, and it's just like, oh, okay, and you know, it's like there's this facade of it's okay if you're queer, and then there's like then the reality of a family member reading my book and being uncomfortable, and like not just if, you know, my mother is like my nearest dearest person, so I think that subconsciously has done a number on my ability to like claim an identity that isn't straight, pretty much. And it was actually, I think probably a year ago, I went out to this random farm where nobody knew me, after a pretty bad breakup with a guy. And I was so angry that I was more vocal about queerness. And there was this really great group of people who were very welcoming and were like, you know, you can be queer too. Like, you don't have to like prove yourself to us in like, there's no test, there's no, like, it's really okay. And that was so helpful, was like, that I didn't have to explain myself, that there wasn't like X number of criteria that I had to meet and check off. And like, and when I was leaving to come back to this frigid coast, one of my newer friends was like, don't let anybody take your queerness from you. And I thought that was a really, I didn't realize that that's what I felt had been happening for years and years and years. Like when she said it, it put into like a solid sentence things that I'd been feeling or hearing, or yeah, it was pretty wild. I think I have much more support now. Starting grad school, I'm with other writers who, the majority of whom are not anything like the people in my town that I grew up with. They're very accepting and loving. And I think that that is also really changing the way that I think about my identity and feel that I can talk about it and express myself. Yes, for therapy, hands down.
All right, thank you both for sharing. We are now down to our last 5 minutes of this panel. So let's see, what's your favorite part of being able to share your identities in your work, or explore them, you know, just being able to express that journey?
I think it feels good to be seen in the world. Like, as scary as it is, it feels really good to also be able to say, this is who I am, here it is. And like, it's not like you never have to see anybody reading your book, right? So you never get their actual reactions. I think about playwrights all the time. I don't know how they do it. Like, everybody in the audience, you can see exactly like what they're taking in. But yeah, so point being, I think it's been really cathartic to have a place where it can just all go, and it's not necessarily burdened on any one person in my life. It's not even burdened as being me, because it's under a fictionalized character and it is made up. So yeah, I guess I appreciate having that space, and I really think that writing as a way to learn things about yourself is so important. And I think it's ridiculous how we think only like novelists should write, as if like you have to write a best-selling book to enjoy or benefit from a writing practice. Like for me, it's the most intimate way of existing. And I think that so many people would also find that, but there's a lot of like, I don't know, pressure to be, at least I think in our culture, like you can only make things as an artist if you are a very successful artist, and everybody else must just consume your art. Which is a long-winded way of saying that, yeah, I appreciate having the space and the resources to like figure my shit out and get a story out there. That's very validating in a way.
Yeah, I really relate to what you're saying about like this idea that art is only for some people to do. I remember seeing this, I think it was just like a graphic on Instagram or something, but it was basically like how capitalism has taught us that these things that humans have naturally done as long as we've existed, dancing, singing, like writing, like leaving pictures of our experience essentially for other people to find, has been turned into this professionalized thing where only people who are good at it or like go to school for it are allowed to do it, and everyone else has to buy it. And that's just not the case. I don't think there's any such thing as like being a bad artist, you know? And I think everybody should have access to that, but that's an aside. The most rewarding thing, I think, oh man, I mean, definitely, yeah, being seen, or like knowing that people are feeling seen in return by my work, feeling like I've put something out in the world that is going to be like helpful in some way, or like comforting to people, especially for teens, because I like didn't have these kinds of books when I was a teen. And I think that teens are brilliant and they deserve like really good books that show their experiences. And yeah, and I think same too as you, Florence, just like having a place to explore my humanity, like my, you know, the like very low lows and the very high highs, and the like sort of, well, I don't really know what's happening here in between. That's what it looks like when I'm writing, like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah.
I love what you said about teens being brilliant too. Sometimes people will be like, oh, you write YA, as if that's like not quite highbrow enough for us over here. And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry that you think an entire cohort's experience doesn't matter. That's so wild. I don't know. I especially feel it with like teenage girls. Like there's been this pigeonhole that like your experience is stupid regardless of what's happened. And I really hate that. And it's nice to do something in a space where people aren't necessarily like, you know, academics aren't necessarily like, please come and talk to me about your YA story. But I don't know, I think it's important. And I don't know, it's cool to meet other people who feel similarly excited about teen stories. And yeah, it's cool to be here. Thank you for having me.
I would much rather talk to a teen about my books than an academic any day. No shade, but it's true.
Yeah, no, they're brutal. They're brutal. I want to be one, but they're brutal.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. We loved having you. It's been great to talk to you about all of this. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us and listened in. And please check out the other panels for the rest of the afternoon. We also have books on sale at Hippocampo with signed book plates. There's a limited stock, so please check those out. And we also still have some merchandise in the store if you want to take a look there as well.
Yeah,
so thank you.
For having me.
Yeah, thank you, Ray and Florence, for joining us.
Thanks so much. See you guys.